Welcome and thank you for joining Crisis Management Readiness, Detecting and Navigating Organizational Crises, presented by Digineer. My name is Jack Thiesing and I will be your moderator today. I would like to introduce today's speakers. Juan Pablo Ayala is a technology communications consultant at Digineer. He has over 7 years of experience in communications and public relations, has successfully deployed communication campaigns, and managed reputational crises for domestic and international clients. Annika Wahlquist began her career in the nonprofit sector as a case manager. In that position, she discovered that her skills, strengths, and passions lie in identifying how systems and procedures can be used as a collaborative process to best serve both clients and providers. As a consultant, Annika has specialized in supporting her clients in technology communications, process improvement, and project coordination. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A feature. Also, Juan Pablo and Annika are broadcasting with their webcams. Zoom has options that allow you to change how you see the presenters during the presentation. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Juan Pablo and Annika.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And yes, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Crisis Management Readiness webinar. I am Juan Pablo and Annika.
And I am Annika. So, crisis management, readiness, and communications. Tale as old as time. As long as there have been humans, there have been crises. As long as there have been crises, there have been people who have to respond to them. Determining how to respond to a crisis has been widely discussed, from the recent Kanye West, Kim Kardashian divorce drama to the great Greek philosophers of ancient times.
So I would like to start with a little bit of history. And the one that came to mind when preparing this webinar was the conversation between Socrates and Gorgias. Gorgias was the group of sophists that thought that rhetoric was the art of persuasion. And I'm going to save you the entire story, but the conclusion was that Socrates said, no, rhetoric is not an art, rhetoric is an experience, right? So let's take, for example, your favorite food. Is your favorite food because I'm guessing it looks good, it smells good, it tastes good? Your experience and your perception of said food is based on the entire composition of said food, right? The same thing happens with rhetoric and the message that you are conceiving for your clients or the message that you are using to represent your company. If it sounds good, if it's worded correctly, if it's structured, well, the perception of your clients and the public is going to be positive. Or the opposite, during a crisis, if you don't create the right message, that experience is going to be negative.
So choosing how to communicate during a crisis isn't something that ancient philosophers pondered. I mean, it is, but that's not all that it is. It's a practice that modern day business people employ every single day.
So this is one of my favorite quotes from Nicolás Umaña Jimeno. He's a crisis expert. Communication serves to maximize the positive or minimize the negative, but never to change reality. And it's just like I said about Socrates and the experience. It might not change reality, but it changes your perception of it.
So I know we started this webinar with a story from before the Common Era, but we still need to take a step back before we move forward. So let's start at the very beginning. I have heard it is a very good place to start. So what is a crisis? Crises can be big or small, but they all have some basic commonalities: their characteristics, area of impact, and origins. A crisis is an unforeseen, uncalculated, and unique situation that requires an immediate and effective reaction to mitigate the possible impacts on the image, reputation, credibility of the affected person or company. Crises can arise from various places, including technical, production, environmental, business, internal. The list goes on and on. Wherever there are people working, a crisis can occur. And although the situation surrounding each crisis is different, they often follow the same pattern of escalation, exposure, and recovery.
So let's dissect the crisis. A crisis often starts quietly and can originate from almost anywhere. They can come from unexpected or expected incidents, negligent work and results, and poorly trained staff. And a crisis can also come from outside your organization. Here at Digineer, we work with clients that have vendors, and sometimes these vendors also have crises. But at the end of the day, we are responsible for that crisis and for the image, right? So the consequences of a crisis, what are they? It threatens your company's image. It threatens your company's reputation, your credibility, and the capacity to properly function. The next stage is the explosion stage. This is the initial reaction and perception of the crisis. There is a sense of vulnerability and or uncertainty as well. And these are the most crucial moments during a crisis. These are where mistakes are made the most and can create long-lasting damage. And next, we have the consolidation stage. This is when the crisis reaches its peak. Your company is exposed to misinformation and wrong interpretations. And by this stage, there should be already a strong consolidated action plan to respond to such crisis. This is not the moment to be reactive. This is the moment to be active. And finally, we have the normality and balance stage. These are the key takeaways and the recovery stage. After every crisis, there's a new definition of normality that is created. And your company or brand should focus on rebuilding such credibility.
Having a roadmap of how crises play out helps you prepare a crisis plan. And while having a plan is an important step in and of itself, being prepared to put that plan into action at a moment's notice is an even more valuable skill. I know that Juan Pablo practices jujitsu, and I know the mantra that they use there is you only fight the way you train. But I was a theater kid, if you didn't already guess that from the Sound of Music reference earlier. So we said, how I practice is how I perform. The sentiments of both statements is the same. The most important part of having a plan is knowing how to use it. This is exactly how the outage communication and readiness model is used at Digineer. Our teams that engage in crisis situations are constantly practicing and improving their response plans. And they do that by building and training a solid team.
So let's start with the team, right? Let's talk about the gatekeeper. We hear a lot about the gatekeeper, and training one or two spokespersons chosen by a company used to be the way a crisis was managed in the past. However, everyone in your team should have a gatekeeper's role. What the new intern or your building's doorman have to say is equally important, especially in the age of social media, as their messages can lead to misinterpretations due to lack of knowledge and poor training. And just a reminder, compliance training is not spokesperson training. Lots of big companies have compliance training thinking this is enough. It is not enough. This needs to be separate, right? So of course, discretion along with the concrete message should be the simplest way and strategy to avoid a crisis from incubating. So even though managing a crisis requires nerves of steel, especially for those who make the actual calls, having a team that can follow a solid plan is key. Most large companies have a PR firm or a designated department with defined roles that know how to mitigate a crisis. But even if your department has nothing to do with communications, PR, or even public affairs, it is important to define roles when in the event of a crisis. So, like you can see on the screen, who will convey the message? Who will gather the information? Who will be the team's spokesperson? And who will make the final decisions? And in making the final decisions, don't make you necessarily responsible, but they need a person that actually makes the final calls to see how the crisis will end.
So it's important to determine what role each member of your team will play. And the best way to prepare your team to respond to a crisis is to catch it before it even happens. And that can be done through effective monitoring.
Definitely. So monitoring a crisis starts the moment your eye catches something out of the ordinary to the moment the crisis reaches its consolidation point. It helps prevent a crisis when you're taking action. It helps mitigate a crisis. It can detect potential missteps and see early warning signs. And it gives you enough time to respond to the crisis. That's timing. And many companies use free tools such as Google Alerts to monitor their brand when they're expecting a crisis coming from an external source. It's free, and I'd say it's probably 85% accurate. So using keywords that are the most relevant to your company helps tracking information, especially your brand or your company is mentioned. And these keywords can include vendors, competitors, and products. And however, internal communication is also something that leads to many of the crises we hear about today. I don't know if you heard about better.com. We heard about Facebook and Meta and the whistleblower. So and another aspect is also internal communications. Internal communications and emails that are poorly written, they don't make employees feel too relevant, and that does not build trust. So it is important to learn how to distinguish real information from all the noise, and that's the difference between hearing and listening. Monitoring gives you the ability to listen about a possible threat or just hearing white noise. That will be just hearing. It also trains you to spot a real threat when several problems are occurring at the same time and react accordingly. And when a crisis reaches its peak, a lot of information is coming from different sources. And it is important to decide what may be true and veridical information and what may be distorted information. So trusting the wrong source can lead to a real disaster. And finally, and I think this one is equally important, is not taking action can sometimes be the best action plan. If you listen carefully and realize that it's just a bunch of white noise, it's not that relevant, it will not affect your company, your team, your reputation, not doing anything, it's definitely the best decision you can make.
But even with the most effective monitoring in the world, crises can and will occur. And when they do, it's crucial that teams respond rather than react. A reaction is like a reflex. It's involuntary, spur of the moment, not backed by a plan. And while your plan should be so well practiced that it feels like a reflex, it's a well thought out and coordinated response, not a reaction. And no matter how you respond, there will always be consequences after a crisis. Managing a crisis is about minimizing damage as much as possible, not making it magically just disappear. There is no magic wand to wave. There's no open sesame password that you can say that will completely rid you of a crisis. But a thoroughly planned response will help mitigate potentially damaging consequences.
So let's talk about the plan, right? Let's talk about the plan. So having an initial crisis SOP to follow is key for success. So the SOP should constantly be updated, is a live document, because emails change. As you know, people leave, the company changes the way it names its tools and departments. And moreover, after every crisis, the lessons learned always help improve this document. So a successful crisis SOP should be included. So first of all, let's think about team roles, right? Who's doing what? Keywords, keeping a consistent style for spelling key elements, such as people's names and last names, words carefully chosen when communicating, and the products. Also, spelling mistake can be costly if you misspell a product or a situation. That can be very costly. Also, standard format to report the crisis, a live document your team can use to communicate with other people and teams, and where they include these keywords. These documents can also serve as a standards format to communicate with people external to the company that they need to be informed about the crisis. And the SOP should also include the levels of the threat. So what classifies as a crisis? Is it really a crisis? Is it something my department team alone can handle? Or does it need to be escalated? And if so, depending on the crisis, who is our point of contact? Let's have a contact list as well. Which departments need to be involved? And finally, the post-mortem. This is just a fancy word for lessons learned, an SOP. It is important to document the chronology of the crisis from the beginning to its end. So depending on the case, this document might be needed for compliance, to report to a client, or simply to understand what can be done to improve the team's response if a similar situation reoccurs. So an SOP, a post-mortem should include where and how the crisis originated from, how the company was impacted, what was communicated to the stakeholders and the public about the crisis, and what was done to mitigate and alleviate the crisis.
So we've got our plan. The next step is, of course, practice. I think Juan Pablo pulled me into this webinar just so I could be the one saying practice, practice, practice over and over again, and not him. But it's true. Consistent and continuous training is key to survival. Making sure your team understands the importance of what they're doing. Practice builds coordination, and coordination leads to assertive decisions, minimizing risks. And along with practice comes communication. Frequent communication combined with consistent feedback is the winner's formula when it comes to crisis mitigation. Over communicating with your team, when done correctly, builds trust and accelerates the speed of response. Because as we said earlier, timing is everything. This constant stream of open communication amongst your team will also prevent internal crises when done correctly. So let's take a look at some real life examples. You're going to see a poll, and on that poll, you will see descriptions that have been abbreviated for clarity and formatting purposes. But I will read the scenarios with all of their detail for you. That way you have a more complete understanding of context for when you select the course of action that you believe to be the best choice. So our first situation. A customer found some dead insects sealed inside an instant soup bag sold by Big Food Inc. that she bought at the supermarket for her children. She immediately informed the supermarket and sent pictures of the incident. The supermarket reached out to Big Food Inc. about the situation, as the customer seemed to be very upset. You're Big Food Inc.'s representative. As that representative, how would you handle this situation?
And I want to remind you that there is no right or wrong answer. Your answer will determine whether the crisis will improve or will worsen. But like Annika said before, it will not make the crisis go away or just magically disappear.
But we have to give you limited options. This isn't a fill in the blank test, it's a multiple choice. So for example, one, we have A, tell the supermarket to offer a refund and apologize to the customer on their behalf. B, tell the supermarket to deny a refund, as this is something that would never happen to Big Food Inc. Their products are managed with the best quality standards. C, ask the supermarket for the customer's information and reach out to her directly. Or D, do nothing. This isn't a real crisis.
All right, thank you to those that I see responding to the options. I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds. Okay, let me share the results.
All right, it looks like almost 2/3 of you said you're going to reach out to the customer directly. As Big Food Inc., this is your responsibility to have a direct communication with the customer. And about 1/4 of you said to tell the supermarket to offer a refund and apologize to the customer. Juan Pablo, I've heard you've been in a very similar situation before. How did you respond?
So definitely. So the supermarket, as the PR firm for the brand, we reached out to the lady and we sincerely apologize. We asked her if she wanted to meet personally. She did. And we found out that she actually runs a daycare. So the company offered not only to take all of their daycare children to the company's headquarters, but offered a nice tour with gifts and food and a lot of support. And we deeply apologize and ensure her that we cared and that we tried to not make these mistakes, but no one's perfect. And she totally understood. So what we did is that we gained an ally, and a brand's representative as well. And I think that was handled perfectly.
On to our next one. Example 2. A small news media outlet reported online that a person had died while consuming alcohol mixed with Big Food Inc.'s most popular energy drink. One of the alerts placed by Big Food Inc. caught the article. The article mentions the name of the deceased person and the location where this person used to reside. You search other popular news media outlets, but you don't see it mentioned anywhere. As Big Food Inc.'s representative, how would you handle this situation? A, immediately prepare a news release with your team to address the incident and send it to the most popular news media outlets before they catch wind of the situation and exaggerate the incident. B, perform thorough research regarding this person, the circumstances in which the incident happened, as well as reaching out to the news media outlet that published the article for more information. Or C, reach out directly to the family to offer condolences and negotiate retribution.
Okay, I see some responses coming in. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. Great, thank you. Let me share the results.
We've got a little bit of a mixed bag this time, with just over half of people saying B, be skeptical of the story, do your own research. And then about a third of our respondents letting their humanity take their decision and reach out and offer condolences to the family. Juan, I heard you were in a situation eerily similar to this as well. What did you do?
Well, if you look at the description, it seems like it was a small news media outlet. It was not reported anywhere else, right? So what happened is, in this situation, there was a thorough research if that person even existed and where was the autopsy performed. And even though the client was really concerned, thinking we should have prepared news release, we realized that we couldn't find anything, absolutely anything about this person. So we kindly reached out to the small news media outlet and asked to remove this fake information. So nothing really was done. And this is one of the situations where doing nothing pays off, because if it would have published a news release, then it would have gotten out of control. More questions would have, arise.
And if you would have reached out to the family, that would have been taking responsibility for a situation that may not have even happened at all. Although I do appreciate the compassion from the individuals who chose that option. So on to our next one, example 3. Big Business Inc. went through a major change in leadership and management about 2 months ago. Employees received a brief email explaining the change just 1 week before the transition and were assured they would not be directly affected. However, 2 months post-transition, employee performance and morale have reached an all-time low. As part of Big Business Inc.'s leadership, how would you handle this situation? Our options are A, ask the communications department to create a survey for employees to pinpoint reasons for lack of motivation. B, start sending out more frequent communications to all departments as your plan to create a more inclusive environment and make every voice count. C, hire an external communications agency that will conduct focus groups on employees to understand their perspective. D, hire an external communications agency that'll conduct focus groups on leadership to understand their perspective. Or E, Hire an external communications agency that will conduct focus groups on both employees and leadership to understand both of their perspectives.
All right, I see responses coming in again. We'll give it a few more seconds for people to respond. Okay, let me share these results with you.
All right, we're a little mixed again, with about a fifth of people saying employee survey, option A, about a quarter of people saying increased communications, and about a half of the respondents saying to hire the external communications agency to focus on employees and leadership. Juan Pablo, crazy how these mirror your real life experience. What did you do in this situation?
I think this is an excellent example of internal communications. And even though some people say that, it will be nice to conduct a survey or maybe to send more frequent communications, you have to understand that this is a crisis that's been brewing for a while. So there's a lot of mistrust. There's mistrust within, the employees thinking that, oh, yeah, now they're starting to send communications or they want to know how we feel. It's a little bit too late. But also you have to consider what is leadership doing as well to create such mistrust. So in this case, the best course of action was to hire an external agency that could actually make everyone feel comfortable, in a safe space where they could express themselves and give their honest opinion. And that's what happened. One day they took the employees, one day they took leadership, and then they discussed the answer, and then they finally offered a solution. That could include those elements that we talked about, sending more frequent communications to employees so they feel valued. And we talked about this, we touched about this subject early on. Poorly written communications, creates a lot of uncertainty within a company.
So on to our last example. There is a much anticipated game sponsored by big sports company. Everyone is ready to buy tickets for the game, and they are expected to be sold out within the first day. However, several media outlets have published an article accusing one of big sports companies' top executives of secretly selling tickets before the actual release date at a much higher price. This article mentions specific details, such as dates, names, places. As one of big sports companies' spokespeople, what do? Do you A, immediately call for a press conference, as well as sharing a press release denying all accusations? B, send a news release admitting guilt, apologizing to the public, and promising a thorough investigation of the incident? Was the incident true? Was the news article fabricated? These are things you want to uncover. C, share a news release explaining that big sports company takes this matter very seriously and is currently performing a thorough internal investigation. This is different from letter B because in letter B, you are taking accountability for the incident before the investigation. Letter C, you're withholding accountability before the investigation is complete. And D, send out a press release denying all accusations, do nothing. No accountability in this one.
Okay, we've got some responses. I'm going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, thank you to those who responded. Let me share the results.
All right, it looks like most respondents said to share a news release explaining big sports company takes this matter very seriously and is currently performing a thorough internal investigation. I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that Juan Pablo, you've been in a similar situation. What did you do?
Absolutely. So this is one of the situations where there's no way out. You have to be completely honest and transparent. the right answer, I want to say the right answer, what we chose was option C. You have to acknowledge the situation. You have to acknowledge that it actually exists and that you're doing everything you can to understand the situation. So that's the first step. But there cannot be a big gap between step C and step B, right? If you find there's some, there's been some wrongdoing, you need to have a press release ready, news release ready to admit guilt and apologize and have a sincere apology. It's all about transparency in this case, right? Denying accusations is just kind of the worst things you can do in a situation like this one.
All right, and that's all we've got for poll questions and scenarios. So we'll now open up the floor to any questions you might have.
Thank you. And again, a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature in the webinar. First question that we have, how do you spot a fake crisis from a real one when you are getting bombarded with information?
Monica, you will let me to take this one?
You got it, Juan.
Okay. So, I mentioned, first of all, I think there's different things to say here. The first is you have to have nerves of steel, right? In the moment the crisis is happening, you need to listen really carefully and look for those little details that may say, okay, this doesn't sound very true, or actually it is true, right? But my second advice, and there's a saying in my country, and I hope I'm saying this right, it's called the devil. It's not the devil because he's the devil. The devil is the devil because he's old. And this is referring to experience. Through practice, through crises, you start learning what feels real and what is not. And this is by having a very structured plan, right? You go through these crises, you go through the postmortem, and you say, got it. I understood what I did right, what I did wrong, and how we're going to avoid this next time. And that will actually, give you that momentum.
Great, thank you. Next question that we have, and this is there's an appreciation for the approach of the scenarios you guys with the polls. And the question kind of following up to those is, do you typically suggest any ongoing cadence to assure the message is sticking, or do you generally leave it alone and see how it goes once you put the communication out?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think Juan Pablo will be able to speak more about the cadence in these particular scenarios, but really each crisis is unique. They're all different and they come in different magnitudes. So if it's something little that you can just put out a statement and wash your hands, there's no need for a cadence. But if this is something that gets social media attention and there's public outrage and the one statement isn't enough, people keep coming back, that's when you would want to continue with your accountability and action steps towards resolution.
Absolutely. And typically, if you are well prepared, the first message should not be enough, but should be enough for the crisis to start going down. And you have to monitor people's reaction, obviously. And depending on the reactions, then your second message, if it's necessary, will be shaped, according to their feedback too.
And it looks like we've got one last question. What is the one advice you'd share with anyone when managing a crisis?
Well, I think you know what mine would be based on the tune I've been singing the entire webinar. The most important part of having a plan is practicing that plan and being confident in your plan and in your team to respond appropriately to situations.
Mine will be transparency. Be transparent, because if you lie, they will find out. If you decide to remove a key aspect of the crisis that eventually the public will find out, you are doomed. There's no way to recover from that. So be honest, be transparent. That doesn't mean you need to give the whole scope. It just means you give enough information for people to understand that you are being honest.
Great.
I think that was a better answer. That's why Juan Pablo's the expert in this.
Actually, there is one more kind of two-piece question. Are there any major flags to look for to determine if a situation is going to escalate to a crisis beforehand? And any distinguishing characteristics within that?
You want me to take this one, Annika?
Yep, I'm tapping you.
In this case, it's the keywords. Those keywords that you're using, you realize that if you know, and it's easy to spot. I'd say if you see those keywords more often, like you see your brand name and you see specific words, accusation, right? You know, in the case of let me think, one of the examples we talked about, in the case of the lady, right? The lady that found those bugs in her soup. When one of those keywords will be, she has pictures, right? You think, oh my God, you connect that to social media right away. What is going to be the impact if those pictures are posted? What is the momentum is going to take? Who's going to share it? How many people, how many followers does she have? Is she going to use TikTok? Is she going to use Instagram? So those are like really big red flags. Like, oh, she decided to take pictures. So those I think those are, you have to kind of connect the dots. Like, what small word will definitely lead to a worse crisis?
Great. Well, thank you again, Juan Pablo and Annika. And thank you everybody for joining. This concludes our webinar. Please look for the recordings of our webinars on our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on our social media channels. Also, if you have any questions, please send an email to info@digineer.com. Have a great day.